Hello everyone, hi. My name is Holger Bruchelt and I want to talk about how you can leverage Azure Active Directory Single Sign-On together with your SAP solutions. So before we get started, I mean, the partnership between SAP and Microsoft has been going on for a lot of years, several years. There's really a very trusted relationship between SAP and Microsoft. Bill McDermott, Satya Nadella meeting on a frequent basis. This has been going back for several years actually, and there are a lot of things as a result of that basically. And you might have seen just yesterday, or actually just today, we had a new announcement again that we are delivering SAP, or that we are delivering HANA large instances that now go up to 24 terabytes of memory. So you can really run your SAP workload on HANA large instances that go up to 24 terabytes. We're talking about new virtual machines that really go up to 12 terabytes of memory. So virtual machines that you can spin up and spin down whenever you want. So there are a lot of things that are currently happening. The interesting thing that I want to cover in today's session is not so much about this infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure is important, and now basically what you can have your SAP system up and running in Azure, which is fantastic. So you can use all the functionalities, the agility, the scalability that comes with Azure. And now you can really use this with your SAP workload. But what I want to focus on today is actually the surround, what you can do with this. So actually when we talk about Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, which I guess most of you are using already today for your single sign-on or for your initial authentication when you log on to Windows, when you log on to Office 365 or something like that. That's where using Active Directory or Azure Active Directory with all the synchronization that comes with these technologies. Now, in the context of SAP, that really becomes very, very interesting. Because obviously with Azure Active Directory, you can get a single sign-on to Office 365, to your Word applications, to your Outlook, to your Excel or whatever you have running in Office 365. This also can apply then to your Fiori application, and that's actually one of the things that I want to show you, so that whenever you log on to Office 365, that you can have a single sign-on experience to your SAP environment, to Fiori screens, to HANA screens, so that the end user in the end can really log on once, ideally with on their Windows desktop or whatever, and then they can seamlessly access Office 365. They can seamlessly access data on the SAP system, your Fiori screens and so on. But it doesn't stop there. Obviously, we have lots of other applications that also use Azure Active Directory. So you can use Dynamics, Power BI, Intune. All these technologies can also be controlled by Azure Active Directory. So with one single sign-on, you can connect now to a lot of tools from Microsoft and a lot of tools also from SAP. And these are not only your classic SAP systems like your ERP system on-premise, your S4HANA system on-premise or something like that, but we're also doing this with a lot of SaaS services from SAP. So whether it is SuccessFactors or Ariba, Concur, the SAP Cloud Platform that we heard a lot about in the keynote today, you can also configure all of these software as a service technologies to leverage the Azure Active Directory. And in today's presentation, that's something that I quickly want to talk about. I want to show you a few examples how you can use this, and also guide you to, only to some extent, to the configuration steps that are required, so that you can really see that it's extremely simple to set up the single sign-on between your Azure Active Directory on the SAP system. Just as a side effect, I was talking just before about the 24 terabytes HANA large instances, all the infrastructure components that we have, that all of you can leverage for your SAP workload. Well, the interesting thing is, even SAP is using more and more of the Azure infrastructure to run their services. So for example, if you look at the HANA Enterprise Cloud, there's an offering now that you can get the HANA Enterprise Cloud on Azure. Or similarly, if you look at the SAP Cloud Platform, you heard about the multi-cloud approach that SAP is running right now. Well, you can also run the SAP Cloud Platform on Azure. And so together with this, in the whole context of bringing your SAP workload on Azure and combining and leveraging the power of the single sign-on components that we have with Active Directory, with Azure Active Directory, that's really something that brings the value, or that brings a huge benefit to the end user, just beyond the simple infrastructure point of view. So what I want to talk about today is basically, well, two examples. The first one, and I hope that I can show this to you live in a second. Let's see, is a very simple scenario where you start by basically having an email basically in your Outlook. So you obviously have authenticated in order to see your emails in Outlook. And let's say you get a workflow notification email that there's a new workflow item pending in your inbox, and you even get a link to your SAP system. Now what you would typically do is you would click on the link, you would log on with your SAP user, you would think about your SAP password, which is obviously different than the password that you have on the Microsoft side. But in our case, leveraging Azure Active Directory, what we can do, we can seamlessly integrate and use the more or less the logon credentials that we have already provided in Office 365 and make sure that you can seamlessly access your Fiori Launchpad, that you do not need to authenticate again, that you're really logged in with the same user that you're logged in here on the Microsoft side, that you're also logged in and authenticated with the same user on the SAP side. Another example is when you have, for example, a Fiori application. So now we're starting from the Fiori side. You have not yet authenticated to Office 365, but we're starting on the Fiori side. But in order to get to this page, you are prompted with your and are asked to authenticate again with your username on the Office side, with your Azure Active Directory user. So with your known username and known password. And then you can access all these services, and beyond that, obviously, you can consume other services like Microsoft Face ID or whatever. So in the background, then we are using, again, the single sign-on technologies to connect to Azure services. So I quickly want to run through a few scenarios where you can actually leverage these single sign-on capabilities. Some of them are probably very well known to you already. Maybe you have already some of them in place. Others might are new, and we just want to show, or what I want to show here is really all the capabilities that we offer in this context. So, example, with Power BI. Some of you might know Power BI, a beautiful tool to use for analytics, to look and analyze the data that we have in the SAP systems. There are a lot of, or there are actually two SAP HANA connectors out there that you can use to connect directly from Power BI to your SAP systems. Well, in the past, what you did when connecting other non-SAP tools to an SAP system, you used a technical user, basically. So a very powerful technical user that had a lot of permissions, maybe SAP all permissions in the backend system, just to get access to all the data. This is obviously something that you do not want. You really want to have a one-to-one user mapping. And what we have now here in Power BI is that we can leverage Kerberos to have a single sign-on from your Power BI view to your data in the SAP backend system. So you really only need to have access permissions in the backend systems that are required to access this specific data, nothing more. And that's really just one of the things where even in the Power BI space, we really can provide a single sign-on scenario. Another scenario that I guess most of you already are using, or that a lot of customers are actually using, is still the SAP GUI. The SAP GUI, most of the customers are still using the SAP GUI, obviously, and not yet Fiori. But still, when you open the SAP GUI, you often do not want to ask the user again for a username and password. A username that maybe you only need once a year or a few times a year when you approve a leave request or when you request a leave request or something like that. Well, also for the SAP GUI, we have single sign-on capabilities. Actually, SAP offers the NetWeaver single sign-on tool to allow you to have Kerberos authentication from the client's desktop to the SAP system. Actually, this NetWeaver single sign-on is also available for the Java stack, so you can also have a Kerberos authentication there. So again, showing that, or bringing the user a beautiful single sign-on experience, that you only log on once with your Microsoft user, and then you have access to, in this case, to the SAP GUI, for example. Another example that I was showing you before, or talking about before, is the Fiori stream. So SAP is pushing the whole Fiori concept a lot. Be it in the NetWeaver stack, in S4HANA, also on the SAP HANA systems itself. Fiori is the new go-to user interface. So the SAP GUI will fade out at some point in time. I mean, right now it's still very, very prominent, but Fiori is the user interface that most of the customers will be using in the future. So again, obviously there's the question, how can I get single sign-on? Now, if we look at Fiori running on a NetWeaver system, on AnyDB, on HANA or whatever, then configuring single sign-on is actually extremely simple. Let me try to, actually I'll skip the demo and we can have the demo afterwards. I have created a few slides just to guide you through the step, and again, we can have a demo afterwards if you're interested. The idea is you have here your Outlook screen, you have this workflow screen, and if I click on this Fiori link, so /SAP BC UI2 is the URL path for a NetWeaver system. If I click on this link, then I'm seamlessly logged on into my Fiori screen. There's no additional input required from the user. The authentication that I have done before in the Office screen is enough to have a single sign-on experience into Fiori. So how am I doing this? The first thing is in the Azure Portal. If I go to the Azure Active Directory configuration, then you can configure so-called enterprise applications. And for these enterprise applications, we have a lot of templates available that allow you to very easily actually configure single sign-on to SAP systems. Actually, to a lot of systems. And SAP is only one of the components or templates that we are providing. But for example, for SAP NetWeaver, the only things that you need to do is I need to configure the service of my SAP system. I need to provide an identifier name and a reply URL. This is more or less all the configuration that is required on the Azure side. And then I can export this information and import this information into the SAML configuration screen on the NetWeaver system. So minimal input. I just configure the steps on the Azure Active Directory side. I export the information and I import it into my NetWeaver system. Just to go back here, so for example here I have this identifier, Azure Active Directory Fiori SAML, and that's exactly what will show up then in the SAP system. Then as a next step, I automatically get the information on who's my identity provider. We are going to use the SAP system for that. And then the remaining system, or the remaining step is basically to select, well, how should the SAP user be mapped to the Microsoft user. And in my scenario, I just used the email address. So I configured the email address in my SAP system. So you can see here the beautiful SAP GUI screen. And obviously with the Microsoft, on the Microsoft side, I have also maintained the email address. So with this configuration, I can then have a single sign-on experience from my Azure Active Directory into the SAP system. Okay, another very important component. So now I've shown you quickly how this is done in a NetWeaver system. Obviously, what gets more and more important is also the SAP Cloud Platform. And here, similarly, we have a very, very easy concept how we can configure single sign-on. So the scenarios that you could think of is that you develop an application on the SAP Cloud Platform, and this application should not only consume services from SAP, but it should also consume services from Microsoft. And obviously, again, you don't want to use a technical user, you don't want to use some manual user interaction, but you really want to have a single sign-on experience, that the services that are being called from the SAP Cloud Platform to Azure should be seamless and with the minimal permissions required. So very similar like before. You go into the Azure Active Directory, into the enterprise application, and this time I'm using the template for the SAP Cloud Platform. So from a configuration view, it looks very, very similar. I provide a sign-on URL, so basically I pick and choose applications that I want to protect now via Azure Active Directory. I again provide an identifier and a reply URL. I export this configuration and import the very same information into the SAP Cloud Platform. So under Security Trust, I import this metadata file. So there's the metadata file. I have the provider name. I get all the certificates immediately, automatically imported in my system. I can do some additional configuration here. I can specify, similar like before, the unique identifier, so the email address, for example. And with this, I have my single sign-on configured. Yeah, and then I can have really this single sign-on experience. So this is for the SAP Cloud Platform. Another quick example that where I don't have actually some more slides prepared, but is when I want to natively go to an SAP HANA system. So same story as before. In the Azure Active Directory, there's a template explicitly for SAP HANA systems. So I would again configure the necessary steps there. I would download the metadata file, and then I can have again a single sign-on experience. So I log on to the SAP Cloud Platform. I get prompted, but I'm getting prompted via for my Azure Active Directory credentials. I'm authenticated, and in the end I have both here, for example, my SAP HANA admin screen, and also then access to my Office 365. So these are just a few examples how you can very easily configure a single sign-on between your SAP systems and the Microsoft systems, where you can leverage Azure Active Directory for the identity management, where you have all your users provisioned, and then where you also create the tickets to then authenticate to the SAP system. Before I end, I quickly want to show one last thing that I find is extremely interesting. So when you're deciding to run your SAP workload on Azure, then you deploy obviously virtual machines on Azure, Linux virtual machines, Windows virtual machines, where you install your SAP HANA system and so on. And typically what you do is you create users there, admin users, end users, monitor users and stuff like that. And what we just announced or released as a preview on Azure is that you can now also connect Azure Active Directory natively to your virtual machines that are running on Azure. So you can really use the user credentials that are available on Azure Active Directory to log in with these users to your virtual machines. I mean, this is not yet single sign-on, but it's the first step to really have the same user provisions that are available on Azure Active Directory now also in your Linux virtual machines running on Azure. So with this, thank you very much for joining this session. If you have some other questions, or if you want to see a live demo, then yeah, stick around, or we can go over to the other side, and then I'll be more than happy to show you more details. Thank you very much.